He is at the right hand of God in the true tabernacle. And what is he doing? He's ministering. That's right. Okay, so in order to get a better picture of Jesus' activities, let's look at the human high priest. The human high priest's life and work was a symbol of Jesus' life and work. Okay, so the high priest in Moses' day engaged in two types of services. There was the daily service, where individual sins were atoned for through individual sacrifices. Okay, so these sacrifices, the people would bring their sacrifice, and their sin would be symbolically moved from themselves to the sanctuary, where they stayed until the yearly service. And in the yearly service is when a special offering was made to symbolically cleanse the accumulated sins of the people from the sanctuary itself. This is also known as the Day of Atonement. Okay, so during this yearly service, people would place the sins from the sanctuary that had been accumulated would be symbolically placed on the head of a scapegoat that would then be released into the wilderness as a symbol of Satan's banishment for bringing sin into the world. Now, as you can imagine, this was a very solemn and serious ceremony. All of Israel was to gather together in fasting and prayer. They were to abstain from work, any other distractions or diversions. They were to focus on what the priest was doing as he atoned for the sins of the entire nation of Israel. And today, our high priest atones for spiritual Israel, the church composed of Jews and Gentiles who believe in Jesus. So he ministers his blood on our behalf before the Father, and his final goal is to remove all sin from the sanctuary and place it upon Satan, who is sin's originator and perpetrator. And this is something, Rabbi Mark Diamond, he comments on the solemnity of the Day of Atonement. It says, as the hours of the Day of Judgment pass, a sense of urgency permeates the congregation in anticipation of the closing of the divine book. Soon our fate for the new year will be sealed. The final service of the holy day reflects this rising crescendo of contrition and atonement. Now, switch gears here a little bit. Are there any prophecies that are pointing towards this investigative judgment? Yes, in fact, there are. Let's go to Daniel chapter 8. Daniel chapter 8. And we will read verse 12. Daniel 8, verse 12. Okay. It says, because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. So Daniel learns this, and he's so disturbed by the thought of an evil power sabotaging the worship of God. And he really resonates with what the angel says in verse 13. Look at verse 13, just about halfway through the verse. It says, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? How long? That's a question a lot of us ask, isn't it? How long is God going to allow sin to continue to prosper? He does have an answer, and he does have a plan to deal with the sin problem. Let's read Daniel 8:14, verse 14. This is kind of key to what we're studying tonight. It says, and he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed. Now, do you all remember last weekend our day-year principle that we learned about? A prophetic day equals a literal year. And we learned that from Numbers 14:34 and Ezekiel 4:6. All right, so using this formula, the 2,300 prophetic days that we read about here in Daniel 8:14 is 2,300 literal years. This means that the cleansing of the sanctuary will come after the 2,300 years. Okay, so this doesn't mean much if we don't have a starting date, right? So when does the 2300 years begin? All right, that's a little small. I hope that you guys can sort of see it. Let's go to Daniel 9:25. So we're going to review a little bit of what Justin explained to us so well last weekend about the 490-year prophecy. As you can see, the 490-year prophecy is just a little section of within the 2300 days. So let's read Daniel 9:25. It says, "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah the Prince," let's stop right there. So from the going forth, now historians will all agree that this decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem was made by the Persian king Artaxerxes in the year 457 BC. Okay, so that gives us a starting date for our 2300-year prophecy. So hopefully you can see in the little green circle here far to the left, 457 BC is our starting date. All right, and then in verse 26, it says, no, we'll pick up where we left off in verse 25. It says, "There shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks." Okay, 7 weeks plus 62 weeks is 69 weeks, right? Which is 483 days or 483 literal years. Okay, and then it says he shall, let's skip down to verse 27, the beginning of verse 27. It says, "Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week." So we've got 1 more week, 7 days, or 7 literal years. So if we add that, 7 literal years to our 483 years, we have the 490 years, which Justin went over last week. And then that last week, we know that in the middle of the week, it says, the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And in the little blue box on the bottom on the right, that's that last week, okay, that we're talking about that's cut off in the middle. And 31 AD is where it was cut off, and we know that that is when Jesus died, okay? So that's a little bit of a review from what we learned last week. But if we start at 457 BC and go forward 2,300 years, that brings us to the year AD 1844. What's the significance of 1844? In 1844, it was like a culmination of a movement that was focused on Jesus' soon coming. There was a small group of believers that had been studying this 2,300-day prophecy in Daniel, and they were studying, and they came up with the same date we did, 457 BC, that's when it starts, and they realized that it ended in 1844, that very year. And they knew that it meant something really significant. But they looked at where it said the cleansing of the sanctuary in verse 14 of Daniel 8, and they thought that that meant that Jesus was going to be coming again that year. Well, needless to say, Jesus did not return in 1844. So these people, they went back to their Bibles, they realized that they missed something, and they looked and looked and looked, and they knew that there was something significant, and they realized that it wasn't pointing towards the second coming of Jesus. It was pointing toward his Day of Atonement ministry, where he would begin that investigative judgment of all the world. So the Second Advent movement led to the discovery that the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary began in 1844. Does that make sense? I hope so. You can ask me questions afterward if it's confusing. So, it's kind of a scary thought to be judged, isn't it? Especially when we consider our sinful selves standing in front of a perfect God. It definitely brings feelings of anxiety and fear, and I think that would be perfectly natural. But we have to remember, 1 John 4:18 tells us, perfect love casts out fear. When we keep at the center of our thoughts the love of God, we realize that the judge is on our side. Let's go to Romans chapter 8, verse 32. Romans chapter 8. Romans 8:32. says, "He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things?" When God gave Jesus as a sacrifice, he proved that he would do anything to save us. He's not trying to outsmart us. He's not trying to make salvation something that is out of our reach. He's trying to love us into salvation. He's trying to make it as easy for us as he can. The good news of the judgment that was taught in the earthly sanctuary is that Jesus stands in our stead. He is our substitute now and when we come into the judgment. All the world is going to be judged, everyone. But the difference between the saved and the lost is that the saved can stand behind the righteousness of Jesus. The lost have to stand before God in their own righteousness, which the Bible calls filthy rags. And in a garment like that, the only verdict can be condemnation. And that's why we need to keep our lives in the care of Jesus. He's promised to prepare us for his soon coming. He tells us in Philippians 1:6, "He who began a good work in you will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ." And even more than this, Jesus presides over the process of judgment. John 5:27 tells us God has given him authority to execute judgment also because he is the Son of Man. And because he is the Son of Man, he knows our every weakness. He has walked every road that we walk. He knows our struggles, and he knows how to lead us out of sin and out of temptation. Place your lives in God's hands. And one day, very soon, you will hear him say to you, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord." Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we're so thankful that we serve a God who we can see your love even in your judgment. We thank you for covering us with your righteousness. Lord, please help us to accept that gift, that love, that righteousness, and continue to be with us as we study your word more and more.